Hi, I'm Mike Farrington. Welcome back to my shop, which I call the Boardroom. And in this video, I'm going to build this small box you see here. It has some Kumiko in the lid, and this pattern is known as Kasane Rindo, and I hope that I'm not butchering that pronunciation. My strategy for building this box is to create a small Kumiko panel first and then build the box around that. I think that it's easier to adjust the size of the parts of the box than it is to adjust the size of the Kumiko. And my first move is to make a whole bunch of strips, and these strips are just a little thicker than the kerf of this small saw blade here. This little devil is a standard 7 1/4 inch saw blade for a handheld circular saw. Its kerf is just a little over 1/16 of an inch, and I'll tell you what, it's sharp as hell. The next step is to cut a series of 30-degree lap joints that are 1/3 of the total height of each strip from the top and bottom edge. If you would like more information about this sled and how to build one for yourself, I have a video on my channel where I go into excruciating detail. This final series of cuts is 2/3 of the way through each piece, and each opening is double cut, and it will be obvious how all this comes together in just a minute. I'm always amazed watching this joint come together. Whoever thought this up was truly brilliant. The importance of sharp tools cannot be overstated when engaged in the act of fine woodworking. I've had a few different sets of Waterstones over the years. I like these the best. These are the Shapton Professionals, but don't let the name scare you off if you're not a professional woodworker. These are for amateurs too. I like these because they don't need to be soaked in water. They just need to be spritzed with water, and then they're ready to use. If I was on my A game, I would have done this thicknessing operation before cutting the lap joints on the table saw. These pieces get fragile after all the kerfs have been cut. After cutting the strips to length, I use a toothpick-sized dab of superglue at each lap joint to hold the framework together. And here I'm planing some additional strips for the infill pieces, and this is much easier when the kerfs have not already been cut. I built these carriage doors that you see behind me a while back, and I'll tell you what, working by natural light is a real pleasure. Here I'm cutting the infill pieces to length, and it's important that both ends of these pieces be 90 degrees, and that they all be a consistent length. Alright, now it's time to move on to cutting the angles on the ends of the infill pieces. And this first angle is 75 degrees, and that would be from a standpoint of if your miter saw could swing over that far. And this second angle is 45 degrees, and I just do this one to knock off that really fine, fragile point. And this last one is 15 degrees. The last step before assembling the pattern is another lap joint. This one's cut at 90 degrees, and the key to this is where is it exactly located on this piece. And I just do it by trial and error until it fits just right. Here's a close-up of the fruits of our labor. 75 degree with that little 45 degree end cut, 15 degrees on the other side, and a 90 degree lap joint. And I like to pre-assemble 6 of these before putting them into the actual grid work. On to the final assembly of this little Kumiko panel. Hopefully I slowed this clip down enough so you can see what I'm doing. Trim off all the stray ends of the disc sander. This makes for a nice, smooth, clean surface that will slide into a box perfectly. So the Kumiko panel is done. I set that aside and I turn my attention to making the box. And I know I profess my love for the mighty bandsaw in every video, but this is a perfect example. Trying to make this cut, which is about 2 inches tall on a table saw, would just be brutal and much more dangerous. After cutting the 6 side pieces to length, I move over to the shooting board and I have a jig that helps me cut 30-degree bevels really accurately. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And the end result's a nice clean bevel. The key to this process though is getting all 6 pieces to be the exact same size, and for that I make one that's the dimension that I want. Then I hold it up to all the others, I mark lines, and I plane down to that line. Then I check the pieces against each other to make sure that they're all the same. The next assignment I have is to create a very shallow rabbet for the Kumiko panel to fit in, and I get started at the router table. And I use the router table just to establish the height, I guess you'd call it, of the rabbet. For final fitment, I come back with a shoulder plane and I take a couple of passes until that Kumiko panel fits in just perfectly. And I have all the pieces taped together here so that I can just roll them around this Kumiko panel to see if the fit is just right. I end up having to do this about 6 times until I get the fit that I'm looking for. With the Kumiko fitting nicely in the rabbet, I cut a 1/8 inch groove for a bottom to fit into. This hexagonal shape's a little tricky to measure, mark, and fit, so I just do it the old-fashioned way with a few shavings at a time. In this shot, I'm demonstrating how to perfectly apply way too much glue. There's something extremely satisfying about making a box, using tape, and seeing the joints all roll together just nice, putting that last piece of tape on. What is that I'm feeling? Oh yeah, a sense of achievement. The only thing harsh in my mellow is the vomitous amounts of squeeze out I have to clean up. And I let the box dry with the Kumiko in it just to ensure that if there's any little distortions, at least they'll be consistent. It can feel sketchy cutting the lid off of a small box at the table saw, but I think this is the best way to do it. So my super secret method is I just don't cut all the way through. I come back and finish the cut with a handsaw. Of course, this will leave a little lip, but that's easy enough to come back and clean up with a block plane.
And that's what you get for falling in love. You get a little and it's never enough. That's what you get for falling in love. Now this wasn't kisses the drug. Whoa, your love is like medicine. Bad medicine is what I need. Whoa, shake it up just like.
Little pitchy, dog. And there you have my song recommendation for this video, Bad Medicine by Bon Jovi. And if you're a record executive listening to this, desperate to give me a recording contract, the answer is no, I'm sticking with this woodworking gig. After recovering from the viscous fiasco of glue squeeze out earlier, I realized it was never really going to be a very big deal because I was always planning on adding a liner to the box. And these pieces, I'm using the exact same jigs and setup that I used to cut the pieces for the box. Sometimes it's just easier to cut and fit small parts by hand. It's real hard to get these little itty-bitty pieces up onto a chop saw safely, or a table saw or whatever. So break out the old handsaw and just do it the old-fashioned way. With the bottom liner piece fit, it was time to move on to the finishing touches, and I think this is a vitally important part when making a very small project that people are going to touch. Chamfering edges, sanding everything smooth, this is all real important to a project that feels nice to the touch. Adhesived back sandpaper and a workbench make the world's greatest gigantic sanding block. I decided to go with polyurethane for the finish. I'm applying it in a slightly unique manner. I'm wiping it on heavy, and then I'm sanding it with wet dry sandpaper, and then I'm wiping it off. I do that 3 times, and it leaves a silky smooth finish. Once the finish had cured, I glued all the liner pieces as well as the Kumiko panel in place, and the box was done. And the final results are a box that's designed to store nothing specific at all, but hopefully will look beautiful on display. This was a fun project to build and a great project to help hone in some of my woodworking skills. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you very much for following along.